Check. Toast. We ready? Idol only plays one way, full throttle. Yo, what's up? Tonight we're doing Dark Fall, Spooky Season, Spooktober, trademark JD and Jamie. Spooky Season. Episode 1, we're going to start off with The Final Girl. Are y'all ready for Halloween? You ready for Halloween? We're going to do Barbarian, American Horror Story, 1984, the 84 season, AHS 84, Camp Redwood. And we're just going to talk about that one briefly, but we're going to talk about The Final Girl, which is the last episode, and of course the episode with Flesh for Fantasy. We are... Flesh for fantasy. Can you turn it down? We have to go to Disneyland tomorrow. Idol only plays one way, full throttle. And of course, Friday the 13th, part 1, the original Friday the 13th, 1980. You know that cool sound effect that plays throughout the whole thing. Sorry. So, listen, we're doing American Horror Story 84, Final Girl, Barbarian, and Friday the 13th Part 1 tonight. So this one's going to be a chill stream. So we're just doing film analysis, and I watched all of these today for you guys. So we're going to get into this, and the Final Girl trope, movie trope, is widespread. It's in many films, and the term was coined by this lady Clover, who wrote she wrote a book on this. Final Girl is a trope in horror films, and this was coined by Carol J. Clover in the book Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Gender in Modern Horror Film, 1992. So I haven't read the book. I don't have the book. But it's a term that she coined that's widespread in film now, and we understand it through characters like Rachel would love that title, right? Shouts out to Rachel out there. But she would love that term because... Of course, it applies to Ripley in Alien, as we know, and also to Alice in Friday the 13th Part 1. It's in Halloween. It's in Friday the 13th. It's in Scream. It's in, of course, Barbarian. It's in lots of movies, but we mainly know this from the horror genre. And so that's what we're going to get into tonight, and we're going to explore that and look at some essays. Some essays on her essays, and a couple of references for that. But we're mainly going to do film analysis of those 3 films. So which one do you guys want to start with? I say we start with Friday the 13th. Okay. So this is an interesting movie. It was produced in 1980. It premiered in 1980. And of course, it's one of those films that, had a like a $500,000 budget, and it made about $56 million at the box office. So it was huge. And then, of course, it spawned a whole film franchise. And that goes away all the way through. Of course, they rebooted the film. They're rebooting all the Halloween movies right now with Michael Myers. And it was made as a kind of a result of the popularity of Halloween, right? John Carpenter's Halloween, which was like, 1978. And it's a teen horror movie. Now, this is something that's popular that's gone all the way through now, right? In fact, we've talked here about when people want to make films that make money. Horror movies are often the money makers because they're easy to produce. They're cheaper than the other films. They're a little bit quicker to make. You can have a smaller cast or a less well-known cast that demands less money. And of course, that there's going to be an audience that's built in for them. So those films allow studios to sort of make their bones as they go. And it's amazing. Yes, Jason says he was surprised by the Halloween reboots. I was too. I was surprised. They're not that they're great films, but they are what they are, folks. And they're pretty well known and easy films to produce, and they're easy to watch. And yes, we are going to kind of try, and we're going to ignore some of the sort of postmodernist takes on that trope. Of course, it was coined in that vein, but we're going to look at it simply from the vantage point of the final girl and how she makes her way through the plot and the narrative. And one thing that's interesting is I actually got my idea for doing this is sort of long running and comes from, I put it in the chat at the very beginning, from the song by Electric Youth, Final Girl. Of course, I knew the term before that, but I love synthwave and the music. There's also a Final Girl song by Churches. I've seen Churches live a couple times. But Electric Youth, right, is known from Drive. And I've got their album Inner World, and I had their EPs and singles before that. But it really drew me into this and made me want to do this. A good book in terms of understanding film would be the book Understanding Movies. This is a book that I got when I was in high school. I bought it at a college bookstore somewhere, and I've sort of devoured this book a number of times. Look who it's got on the front there. This is a late 90s book, but it's got Jurassic Park on the front there. And you may see me and some special guests doing this, doing an analysis of Jurassic Park sometime in the future, sometime kind of soon. But that's a good book for understanding the sort of construction of movies and film techniques. So let's start with Friday the 13th. Again, so this was a movie that was premiered in 1980, and it was a huge hit. And not as big of a hit as something like Mad Max, which of course is, I just think of Mad Max because it's another film that was made on a shoestring budget and edited, in a friend's bedroom, and then went on to spawn a franchise, and then made tons and tons of money. So Friday the 13th, of course, did that. Now, so one thing about this is that the film begins, right, with when the logo pops up. Of course, we hear the shattering of glass, and you may have forgotten that. But of course, we've talked about the symbolism of the shattering of glass. That will play a role in my own novel if I can ever get it finished and published, because the shattering of glass represents the shattering of the psyche, and that's going to play a role in the killer in this movie, the slasher. So, spoiler alert, this is not a review of the movie. We're going to talk about a deep analysis of the movie, so I'm just going to say right away that we know now that the killer is, are you ready? If you haven't seen the movie, then you may not want to hear this, but the killer, of course, in Friday the 13th is different from the other Friday the 13th movies because it's not Jason Voorhees, it is Mrs. Voorhees, right? So we're going to learn about the shattering of glass later. Of course, the slasher film sort of ties in with the shattered glass in terms of the sharp object, right? That's often used as the method in this. And there are axes bow and arrow, and all sorts of methods by which she achieves her psychotic mission. But we see, of course, we start off with these teenagers, and they're going towards Camp Crystal Lake in New Jersey. Hey, we got a camp here. I'm walking here, right? And this is a real camp. It was actually filmed at a real camp that is, I guess, still extant. And of course, I mean, it's tied in with the film, and I'm sure that they get lots of people there just because of the movie, if they even remember the movie now. But this was Camp Crystal Lake in the film. And one thing that's interesting about that, in terms of, again, of the symbolism, was we get the shattering of the glass, and the lake functions as glass because the final scene of the final memorable scene of the film is we get a shot of this perfectly still lake, and the final girl, who, again, spoiler, is going to be Alice. Right, Alice, of course, we're following Alice through the looking glass, through the shattered glass here, and Alice is going to end up floating in this canoe on the lake, and it's really a beautiful shot because she's center in the frame, and we see the mirrored world, the upside down world, right? In terms of the lake, we see the beautiful sort of fall background. It's not fall, it's supposed to be summer, but we see the leaves in the background. They look fallish, autumnal, and it's perfectly still mirrored, and she's lying in the canoe, like with one arm kind of dangling, and then she puts her arm into the water and breaks the surface. So it's a crystal lake, right? And she's not the first one that we meet in the movie. We meet we meet a few different people. One of the people that we meet is another girl who is making her way to the camp, and she's hitchhiking. And she gets a ride with the oil man, and the oil man, of course, is it's 1980, so I guess people are still hitchhiking, right? And she's, she may not be a teenager. She's older than that because they're camp counselors, right? That's the whole point of the movie. She's going to her camp counselor job to set up the camp before the kids get there. So it would be, early summer, late spring. But she's wary enough to not listen to this man who looks like he would be out of the Stephen King movie. What is it? I think we got a situation here. What's that movie with Emilio Estevez? I think we got a situation here. But he's a nice old man, and she's okay with getting a ride from him. And he tells her, don't go up to that camp. It's kind of funny because they don't have New Jersey accents. I guess they have sort of a mid-Atlantic accents. They're not mid-Atlantic in terms of standard American, the accent of the mid-Atlantic elite. Of course, these are kids, and this is a blue-collar guy in New Jersey, but he kind of, when I think about him, he sort of has a kind of a southern accent. He's like, make sure you don't go on up there. There's been a lot of bad stuff that's happened up there. Now, look, if you're going to your camp counselor job and you are, first of all, I guess, hitchhiking, you hitch a ride with the oil man, and the oil man says, you don't want to go up there. There's been 12 people that's been killed. One with an axe, a couple of people a few years ago. They were all killed. Right? It's like, maybe don't go. But she says, hey, let me out here. Hey, I'm trying to drive here. I'm trying to get a ride here. So she says, let me out here. And she gets out by the Moravian cemetery, right? And then she makes her way over to the camp. Then we see there's this real creeper dude who's the head, and he's got no shirt on. He's working there. He's chopping wood in a very strange way. Do you remember how he chops wood in this first one? It's very weird. It's like they told the guy, hey, chop wood and make sure you get like 7 logs in 20 seconds in the scene. So he's not doing a full chop. He's like chop. It's very strange how he does it. And he's got this mustache. He's got a prawn stash. And he's got his shades on. And then he goes up and he sees that after they kind of get there and he's talking to him and stuff, hey, we got to get to work. There's 3 kids that show up in a van, Texas Chainsaw Massacre style. And one of the kids in the van is, of course, Kevin Bacon. I guess this is one of his first roles. He's very young. Kevin Bacon's in the car. And also, I think it's Harry Crosby, Bing Crosby's son. Hey, make sure you do well in this or I'm going to knock you one. Right? Or is that Gregory Peck? Can't remember the family, guys. It's Gregory Peck with his two kids in the back, but I guess it's Bing Crosby. I think there was something sketchy about his story. But remember this? Remember the video that Bing Crosby did with David Bowie singing "Ba-rumpa Bum Bum"? He's like "Ba-rumpa Ba-rumpa Bum Bum." How do you do it, Bing Crosby? Ba-rumpa Bum Bum. Not blinking. He's got that blue sweater on or whatever. But anyway, his kid is in the movie, and of course, I think they did that because they were trying to mimic the success of Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, right? She's the daughter. She's the what they say is, I guess I'm not going to go into that, but she's the daughter of Tony Curtis, right? Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh. Oh, interesting. Isn't Janet? Yeah, is Janet Leigh her mother? Jamie Lee Curtis. It's spelled differently, but Janet Leigh is Janet Leigh. Somebody tell me in the chat, is Janet Leigh Jamie Lee Curtis's mother? Maybe I'm wrong about that. But speaking of Janet Leigh, I'm thinking of Psycho, and the Mrs. Voorhees character is obviously supposed to be a take on Psycho, even though she's the blonde woman, and the blonde woman gets the blade in Psycho, which is different from the way that it is in this, where she, I guess, has some sort of film, some sort of it's an allusion to a film revenge, right? The camp was founded in 1935, and that's interesting because when I saw the sign for Camp Crystal Lake, I thought, wow, that's a long time ago. This is an old camp, but it's 1980, and so that's 45 years. So the difference between Camp Crystal Lake's founding to when the movie takes place is just a little bit older than how I am now. That's sad. Wow. That's something to think about, right? Wow. So anyway, so we see Prawn Stash up there, and he goes up and he sees Alice, who's a new character that we meet. And I got to say right away, I think that any discerning mind, anybody watching this film, one of the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy in terms of learning or understanding literature, of course, we get analysis, and then we get prediction. At the final stage, at the top of that little educational pyramid or whatever, we get creation. You take the things and you create your own work. But in terms of prediction, our powers of prediction are probably pretty strong here in the audience that watches this. And I think you should be able to predict that Alice is going to be the final girl when you watch this. Number one, there's something about her that looks like she would be cast as the final girl. Now, of course, that's a stupid thing to say in hindsight. But the fact that she is more fully clothed than the other characters, I think, gives us an indication that she's going to be the one that survives. And we're going to get into what this lady that coined the term says about that. But she's got this kind of blonde 80s mop top. She's fully clothed. She's helping with the construction of the camp. She's like trying to nail up the gutters, which is interesting because it shows that she's fully involved in the creative aspect of the camp. She comes with solutions. Remember we talked about Nightcrawler and how Lou Bloom says, you see, most people, they will only present more problems. You keep coming to me with problems. Come to me with solutions. Well, she comes with solutions. So at the beginning of the film, she's trying to nail up the gutters, and this camp sort of serves itself as a gutter. Blood runs into the gutter of the camp, right? Because of the continuous murders that occur over the years. It also has some real gutter activity, and we hear guttural screams. So she's trying to nail those up. She's trying to fix the camp, make it something better. And of course, Prawn Man, Tom Selleck, Blonde Selleck comes over to her, and he alludes to something before. Can't we just forget about that? So he's crept on her before, I suppose. And he then he says, he like puts his hand on her shoulder, and she kind of has this weird look. So we know that she's a more wholesome character, right? And then we meet various characters, and time goes on, and what happens is one of the other things that occurs in this movie that's very famous is that we see things from the perspective of the killer. So we start off in a third-person sort of objective, all-encompassing, Panavision, and then we go into the vision from in terms of from the killer. We don't know who the killer is yet, but we see kind of handheld camera, shaky cam, right? We don't know who it's going to be yet. And whenever the characters are presented, we know that they know who the killer is because they always greet the killer. And yet they don't ever name the killer, so they're careful not to give away the sex of the person. And just by that, we kind of figure that this is probably not going to be a male killer, right? We're talking about prediction here. There's going to be some sort of twist. And it's very unusual. I will say that it's unusual and it's unexpected. But this is going to be played on, of course, in American Horror Story 84, AHS 84, Camp Redwood. I'm going to call it Camp Redwood from now on. There's going to be a trope that's played on with that to the max. In extremis, right, to death. And then we see there's a cop that drives up. And this is a very weird cop. The cop drives up to the camp. So on the one hand, we get a sense of the remoteness of the camp. Later on, somebody's going to say, Alice is going to say, why don't we just run out of here? Why don't we just get out of here? Right? We can just leave right now. So she wants to leave. That's another indication sort of midway through the film that she's going to be the final girl. But one of the guys tells her, it's 10 miles to the nearest crossroads. See you at the crossroads. And I'm going to miss everybody. And I'm going to miss everybody. Right? Again, the crossroads of death, but they are sort of at the crossroads themselves. We saw a crossroad when the girl got out of the camp. Got out of the oil truck by the Moravian cemetery. There's a sort of crossroad there. At least there's a T-junction. So we know that's not really accurate. So what I'm saying is that the camp seems to be both remote and close enough to the town where there's a lot of traffic going by. There's cars in and out, and one of the cars is this cop. Also to mention how we know that she's the final girl. Alice, we're following Alice. So we have to follow Alice through the looking glass, down the rabbit hole, and we have to, of course, follow her out. So that's how another reason we know that it's going to be her. Also, her name begins with A, which is, I'm not saying this in an esoteric or like gematria fashion, something too deep. I'm just saying that in my gut instinct, surface mind watching the film, I hear the word Alice. I don't hear any other characters with an A. Voorhees, of course, which comes up later, is towards the end of the alphabet. But A, Alice, it's kind of like she's the first and the last, right? The first shall be last, the last shall be first. She's going to survive. So we seem to be close to the crossroad, but also remote. And now, so the cop shows up out of nowhere. So it's like, well, we can't be that remote. So this cop shows up, motorcycle cop, Chips shows up. And this just shows you the difference in the world, right? Between 1980 cops and post Big Nine cops, where we have totally militarized, the totally militarized, Himmler cop that shows up. Here we get the kind of podunk, blue-shirted motorcycle cop who shows up, and he's still in the mode of when it was just keeping the peace. But he's kind of a jackass. Right? He doesn't like the kids. He shows up and he says, "What are you kids doing here? What are you smoking?" Harry Crosby, or one of the kids, is like smoking a cigarette, and he's like, "I'm talking about the devil's lettuce, that bubonic chronic. I'm talking about that sticky icky. I'm talking about that sensimelia. What you smoking there?" And he kind of grabs him. He's like, "Enough out of you." One of the kids is like doing a Native American rain dance, got no shirt on. He found a headdress somewhere because it's a camp. Right, so he's doing a headdress. He's being wacky, and the cop doesn't like that. And he basically shows up, and he says, as a warning, though, he's keeping the peace. He shows up, and he says, "Now listen, you kids. I want you to beware of that drunken, insane man that's gone loose in the woods. He might show up here. It's no big deal." Right, he just escaped from Bellevue and Louis Jolly and West facility right up the road, but that's okay. If you find him, let me know. Well, it turns out when they go back inside that this guy, Mr. McCreepazoid, is like inside the pantry, but he's he functions as a sort of not a Tiresias. I guess he would be some sort of archetypal messenger figure, right? Because he shows up and he says, "God sent me." He says, God sent me. You all should leave. You need to leave now. Now listen, if you were the girl in the oil truck and you heard the guy saying, get out of there, don't go there. There's been multiple murders at this camp. Don't go. And then he drops you off nicely so we can believe him. And then you make your way to the camp, and there seems to be nobody in charge except for Coom Selleck. And then the drunken Deus Ex Machina Irish McProfit shows up and says, everyone's going to die. You need to leave here. You should probably go. Just from the fact that that dude was hanging in the pantry. But it's 1980, and I suppose everything is hunky-dory. Hunky-dory, right? There's your David Bowie reference. Ba-rum-pa-bum-bum. So, right. So they say, get out of here. Get out of here. I think it's Alice who tells him to leave. So she's assertive. Right. And then the guy walks out. He kind of stumbles out, and then he changes direction and he leaves. And then they make one more reference to him in the film. But then what we see is like it's a dark night, and now people are going to start dropping. They're going to start dying. And it takes a long time, of course, for the other camp counselors to figure out who it is that did the deed, or that even that people are missing, because they are so wrapped up in their pervert activities, right? So, I guess it's like this. I mean, look, I never went to a camp like that. I went to lacrosse camp. I went to W&L lacrosse camp in Hampton, Sydney, right, where all we did was play lacrosse all day. We stayed in the dorms. My friend Taylor, my best friend, I roomed with my best friend. There was no air conditioning. We stayed inside. We played lacrosse 3 times a day. And my friend Taylor brought his boombox. And I just remember that this was after 6th grade, the first time I went there. I went there, and he had a CD of Alice in Chains' Dirt, and he played it so many times that everybody on the hallway wanted to kill him. And he just kept playing, that song, Them Bones. Them Bones, right? And then he played Soul Asylum, Grave Dancers Union. So many times. We thought it was funny. I had a Rage Against the Machine t-shirt. And then eventually, we also went to Hampton, Sydney lacrosse camp, and that's when the coach one night. Did I tell you guys this story? A little tangent here. I was rooming with my friends Brad, Taylor, and Spencer. Shouts out to my homeboys out there. And one night, the coach, the head coach of Hampton Sydney lacrosse, he's a university, college lacrosse coach, but he was running the camp. He kicked in the door. Bam! Kicked in the door we had a double dorm room, and he comes in and he goes, what's going on in here? And we were like, what? It was like 2 a.m. We were like, what, dude, what? And he was like, it smells like butts in here. And we were like, what? What does that even mean? He was like, smells like butts. You guys smoking butts in here? You guys kicking a square? And we were like, we don't know what that means, dude. He was like, you guys smoking cigs in here. I can smell it. I can smell cigs in here from a mile away. You guys are 12 years old. You can't be doing that. We were like, we never did that, sir. And, of course, we've been smoking cigarettes for like 7 hours on the balcony. But anyway, so that was my camp. My camp was a little bit different than this camp. Hey, shouts out to Buster out there. Who drops $100 and says, valuable channel. Listen, folks, Buster says it's a valuable channel. He came in, he said, it's a valuable channel. I said to myself, it's a valuable channel. Good. Thank you so much, Buster, for that. Appreciate it. So, yes, if you want to support, you can hit that super chat button down there. You can also like and share the stream. You can support me in a number of different ways. Jason, my homeboy out there, the mod who's taking care of you guys, is dropping those links. But shouts out to Buster. So, yes, no, that was great that Buster dropped that, because now I can hopefully make that money that YouTube has held back, because you got to make a threshold to make the super chats. I won't get, that's boring to talk about. But that now that gets unlocked, so I can expect that. So thank you so much, appreciate it. There's a lot of behind the scenes as far as all that goes, and Kristen, points out that they keep a big percentage. But anyway, so yeah, you can support me. You can like and share the stream. So listen, their camp experience is a little bit different because they're camp counselors and they're all being perverts, and they're having like strip poker, playing Monopoly, and all this stuff. But notice that Alice is the one who doesn't. She's the one who kind of keeps it together. So we start to see them drop, and I won't go through how they end up in a sequence. It's not really important, other than to say that the other people get killed. One gets an axe. A girl gets an axe to the face, like Pat Bateman style, right? Another dude, I guess it's the Crosby guy, gets bow and arrowed and then hung up. That's odd. He gets bow and arrowed and hung up on the back of a door. So a bunch of stuff happens to him. Of course, it was the legendary Tom Savini who did the makeup and stunts on this movie. So that's cool. Also, one thing I learned about the movie is that even, it was filmed in New Jersey at this actual camp, but the nearest next door neighbor was Lou Reed. It was Lou Reed. And so Lou Reed apparently was a nice fellow, went down there and played some new tunes. Maybe he played that song Gun, that Lou Reed song Gun. That's a good song. But maybe he played that for the kids down there at the camp. But apparently he came by the set. But anyway, so they start to drop like flies, and then eventually we see there's a great scene. One of my favorite scenes is where who is it? Oh, it's Coombs Selleck, right? Who is at the diner. It's a scene. It's a cold scene at the diner. I don't know why, by the way. It's summertime and they are constantly getting cold in this movie. I mean, obviously for the purposes of the movie they are, because the frigid air symbolizes the death that's approaching. But I don't remember the last time that I was cold on a summer night. Anywhere on the Beast Coast here. But anyway, they're cold and it's rainy and he's at the diner. And we see Sandy. She's probably my favorite character in this whole movie. Sandy. Anytime you have a movie and you have diner characters, especially if they're in New Jersey, they're great, right? It's like remember in the No Country for Old Men scene where Anton Chigurh shows up and I said, we don't have no rooms available, right? The one lady in the whole movie that's able to push back in a substantive way against Anton Chigurh and get away with it. That big lady, right? Well, this lady reminds me of her because she's all alone at the diner. She can take care of herself. And her name's Sandy. And she's obviously got this wig on. And she says, another cup of coffee, pal. Right? We got a cheeseburger with tomatoes on. Meat plow with the sunshine. Right? And she fills him up his coffee, and then at the end she says, that'll be $2. Right? Of course, a cup of coffee in 1980 is like 5 cents. And he tips her. He tips her like a nickel or a dime. She says, thank you very much. And she's not worried at all, by the way. She says, oh, you saw Frank McCreepy. You saw Frank McCreepy out in the woods. Oh, that's something. He's such a character. She's not afraid at all. So Coombs Selleck goes back. And when Coombs Selleck goes back, rides his Jeep very fast. All the driving is very fast, and it's weird because they have the camera so close up the road. They're always driving, by the way, on the left side of the road in this movie. It's very weird. So he shows up back at the camp, and he gets murked in his Jeep, in his World War II era Jeep. Right. David says, never been cold at night in summertime because he'd never been anywhere north in North America. Campfires in summer aren't just for fun. No, I've never been cold in the summertime, ever. Maybe I just don't feel the cold, right? Alpha Chads don't get cold in the summertime, bro. We only build fires because they're fun. No, I just don't remember that. I don't remember ever doing that, especially when I was younger. I guess maybe in Maine. I went to Maine with my friends one summer, and it did get cool there, David. I'll give you credit for that. Yeah, it did get cool up in Maine, but that's of course next to Canada. So I imagine it's cold all the time up there, not like down here down south. But anyway, so then we see that Alice walks out, and we see this lady for the first time, and this lady comes out of nowhere, and what's the actress's name? Betsy. I want to say Betsy DeVos, Eric Prince's sister. Betsy Palmer, Mrs. Voorhees, Betsy Palmer. She's quite a beautiful woman. She must have been an infamous character, but in her younger years, I suppose she was pretty beautiful. But she comes out of nowhere, kind of as a Janet Leigh character, but older and on in years. But anyway, she says, "I can help you. I can help you." You know, you got to calm down. Of course, when they tell you to calm down, right? You know it's over. So Alice says, "No, that everyone's dead. Everyone's dead in the camp. Don't worry, child. Don't worry. We'll take care of it." Oh boy. And she says, I was sent here by the owners of the camp. I know them, Mr. and Mrs. Williams or whatever. So they go inside, and then what does she do? She starts telling the story of her son. She says, "Did you know that 2 years before the murders occurred, there was a boy who drowned here, and the camp counselors did nothing. They were off being perverts, just like you filthy little strumpet." So she changes, and Alice is like, "Oh boy, it takes a long time." They have a long fight sequence if you look at it in the context of the movie. She tries to slash her. She gets away. Alice ends up like knocking her out like 3 different times, right? She knocks her out like with a frying pan. She hides in the closet. Of course, when she hides in the pantry and locks we see that this is great. She hides in the pantry. She locks the door, and then we see the door like, the door handle like turning slightly. And I'd forgotten what had happened at that point, and I thought that she was going to come in, with an axe through the outside, but she didn't. She comes in, and she's like slashing at her, but she misses. Alice knocks her out with a frying pan. At one point, she knocks her into the stack of gnarly mattresses. The scene that really kind of, pissed me off was when she goes inside the house. Alice like runs inside for protection, gets a rope, ties it to the door handle, so the door obviously opens to the outside. But then she tries to barricade the door, but she puts everything against the door, pushing on the door. That didn't make any sense. Also, there's another scene that bothered me, and it's clearly because it's a low budget movie, right? But it showed me Alice's sort of, I guess, naivete and inattention. It's a very small scene, probably accidental, but there's a scene where she's making coffee. She's making her cup of coffee, and this is so annoying. She's got the water on boil, and she goes and gets the coffee cups. Then she gets the sugar, and she opens the sugar, and she tap, 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 puts the sugar in each cup and taps 3 times. And I thought, oh my gosh. And then she takes the bottle. It's a glass. Of course, it's a glass bottle. Look at the times that we were in. Everything was glass, healthier. She gets the glass bottle. She gets the lid. She's tightening the lid for like a good 30 seconds and then doesn't tighten it on the way and leaves it halfway off, and it's not tightened. And then she leaves it on the, and I thought, oh, come on. You're sitting there. This is so cheap. You're sitting there. Just tighten the lid on the sugar. The whole place is full of, the flies are going to get in the damn sugar. That's not even what I care about. It's just like when you get the lid, just put it on. Maybe that's my OCD mind. There's also the scene with the snake that occurred early on. They go inside and there's a snake, and she calls out to one of the boys to come fix it. So look what world we're in, right? There's a snake in the one of the cabins, and they call to the men to take care of the snake. They come in. Of course, they're young, so they say, "What do we do?" One of them comes in with a shovel. Kevin Bacon, I think, comes in with a shovel. Another one comes in with a knife, and it's a black snake, so they don't know that. If my friend Cheever was there, he would just grab the black snake by the tail and then throw it outside. Don't kill the black snake; it's going to kill all the rats around there. But what it shows is that there's a snake within their grounds. There's a literal snake and there's a figurative snake. And then when we see Mrs. Voorhees, of course, she's going to symbolize this snake, right? Serpent, Eve. They're outside. They're in a natural setting, right? There's the baptismal sort of motif with the crystal lake. How Alice is going to go underwater, and at the end of the film, she gets drawn underwater and then wakes up out of it, and now she's at the hospital, and she's questioning her reality at that point, but she's woken up into a world where she lives, right, where she has life after this baptismal scene. Of course, she's dragged under by Jason himself in her dream. But the snake is going to be, we see the snake making its way into the garden, right? And of course, there's a bunch of perversion that happens after that. But they kill the snake, they chop it into 2 or 3 sections. And then anyway, in the death scene, we see Mrs. Voorhees, and Alice doesn't want to kill. I mean, she clearly doesn't want to kill her, or she doesn't know how. She's young. She's the final girl. She's the only one left. Hits her with a frying pan, runs out to the lake, and she sits there looking at the lake. And then Mrs. Voorhees, we because we see a back shot, right? We see Alice from behind. We know that the killer is approaching. She shows up, turns around just in time. Ah! Oh! At one point, she knocks her out, and she says, "Ow!" But she shows up, and then Alice gets hold of the knife and does she run her through? She ends up chopping her head off. And we see Mrs. Voorhees with her hands, her hands are still moving, and she falls to the ground. So now she's safe. She gets in the canoe. That's at the point where I described she goes out into the water to be safe. You know, if she'd gotten out into the water earlier, that was Alice has good instincts. She doesn't execute well until she executes, but she has good instincts. One is to try to get away, and others to try to defend herself. She knocks out the woman. She don't want to stay too long. She gets out. She hides in the closet. Then she goes out into the water, and she gets in the canoe. She knows that nobody can get her there. She can see a 360-degree perspective. But now she's safe, and she falls asleep in the water. But she's, again, that double scene, right, where we have a kind of a doubled mirror reality. And then we see something terrifying, and this is a good jump scare. We see the vision of Jason coming out of the water as a kind of Lovecraftian sea creature, grabbing her and pulling her underwater. But that is a kind of baptismal scene for her, because she wakes up and she's in the hospital and she's safe, and she says, is he still there, the little boy in the lake? And remember that the important thing with the reason that she's doing this in the movie, the reason the killer is because Mrs. Voorhees says that her boy Jason was at the camp. He was a camper, and that he drowned. He wasn't a good swimmer. He drowned, and that nobody was paying attention. And as that's happening, of course, we hear his voice, "Mommy, Mommy." And then she dissociates into her alter, which is her son. So the mirror fracturing at the beginning of the movie, I suppose, is supposed to be her distance from reality, right? And then her finding her alter, and then she becomes the killer. Because there's a point where, remember when there's a one important line where she calls out, she says, we hear Jason say, "Help me, Mommy, help me." And she says, "I am Jason, I am," which is to say, I am going to help you. But really what she's saying is, I am Jason. So she is Jason, right? And then she starts dissociating. "I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill them all. Don't worry, son," right? Which is pretty well done in the film. And also, of course, in the end of the movie, that leaves room for the sequel. So that is Friday the 13th. And it's pretty good. Of course, again, speaking of the final girl, Alice is the final girl. She survives. And she is a sort of a good template for the future characters. So before we move on to, I guess we'll talk about American Horror Story 84 Camp Redwood. Just a couple of things from that show. Let me pull up here this thing about Clover, Carol J. Clover, and the original theory of the final girl. So let's see if I can pull this up. Okay, here we go. So this is Horror Film Theory 101, Carol J. Clover's original theory of the final girl. And I thought I would just kind of take us through this briefly. Okay, so what it says here is, it seems everywhere you look in horror fiction and fandom these days, this is from 2 years ago, the final girl is the buzz. Of course, there was a movie you guys remember called Final Girl that came out in, I think, somewhere around 2015. It's got Alexander Ludwig and not Dakota Fanning, the other girl. Um, oh my gosh, what's her name? It's got Wes Bentley in it. It looks like a bad film, but it's actually not bad. I checked it out. Abigail Breslin, and it's actually called Final Girl. Yeah, 2015, and this is where Wes Bentley is sort of a singular Louis Jolyon West monarch handler, and all we know in the film is that he has this blonde Scarlet girl, Abigail Breslin, and he's training her for a kind of Hannah style. Remember the movie Hannah and the TV show? For how to survive. And it's all sort of inside a facility. She goes from black to red. At one point, he straps her down on a table and he administers DZMT and scopolamine, right? Truth serum to her so that she can face her darkest fears. And her darkest fear, we learn, is that she's going to fail the program. So she's, in a way, she's a true monarch. We don't know much more about her, but she's a true monarch in that sense. And then she finds herself going out with this group of Eyes Wide Shut characters in a most dangerous game. Alexander Ludwig and 3 of his friends. They're picked up at their various mansions. They have tuxedos on. And they take her out into the woods. They play Truth or Dare. And then the game is basically at the end that they're going to hunt her because this is what they do. We did our stream on the most dangerous game. Check that out. And then she ends up fighting back and winning because she's been trained for it, even though one of them wants to marry the Scarlet Woman, Alexander Ludwig. He plays Bjorn Ironside in Vikings that I just talked about last night, actually, as part of that stream on the Icelandic Saga. But she ends up winning and then going and finding her handler, and then they unite. So that's Final Girl, the movie. But this is talking about the Final Girl trope. And what it says here is that it seems everywhere you look that this is the Final Girl is a buzz. My Heart is a Chainsaw featuring Jade, the protagonist who's obsessed with final girls in the films she watches with the local events where she lives. Grady Hendrix's latest novel, The Final Girl Support Group, trades explicitly on this term. I have not heard of that book. Halloween Kills has returned to the big screen. I saw that film. One of the Final Girl foundations, harkening back to John Carpenter's 1978 classic Halloween. This says, but the tip of the butcher knife. Okay, clever. But for every 100 people who drop the term Final Girl, maybe one has ever read the origin text, Carol J. Clover's 1992 book, Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Gender in the Modern Horror Film. Now, of course, this is what this is about, right? But actually, if I had come upon this article before this, then I probably would have ordered the book, just so we could go. And in fact, I'm going to order the book so that I can read it and go and be more well informed as to Carol J. Clover's actual thesis before we do the next Final Girl segment in the next Spooktober stream. Clover's book, but I didn't actually know this, so I'm learning along with you guys. Clover's book is geared to film scholars as it leverages a range of fellow film theorists, psychoanalytic concepts by Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan, and gender theory by Judith Butler, among others. Okay, I don't care about that part, but this article shares several of Clover's provocative insights and arguments from the book. Clover wrote about horror films, slashers in particular, but also possession and revenge films. These subgenres exerted significant cultural force in the 1970s and 80s, but were not written about seriously by scholars or critics. I'm just reading the article aloud to you in case you're just listening. Of course, Fangoria and other lesser well-known publications are exceptions to this, but Clover was addressing a gap in consideration of the films in more broadly public intellectual spaces than those tailored directly for genre fans. A question driving Clover's study was, why did slashers consistently feature a female protagonist when the target and actual audience was predominantly male? Well, it's a good question. It's a fine question to ask, especially in terms of film theory, because this is such a trope, so we need to understand this. This point of inquiry is the crux of the study. While most casual users of Final Girl in horror conversations can point to that behavior, to the behaviors that get other women killed along the film's trajectory, that's not the point of inquiry, right? That's not at all what people point to when they talk about the Final Girl, but that's okay. One that might not be well known is Clover's sophisticated answer to the question. Clover articulated these with reference to milestone films like Halloween and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as well as a broader data set sensibility from screening and studying the category of films exhaustively. Let's see. Clover further defines The Final Girl as an innovation that radically shifts away from Alfred Hitchcock's seminal 1960 film Psycho. True, and of course, it's the seminal film, right? There's a kind of a pervert pun there because it seeds the other films, but also the film is about this sort of seminal relationship between the mother and son, right? True enough, Psycho centers on identification across gender, yet the narrative aligns spectators with Norman Bates. The end of the film reinforces identification when Norman, as this entanglement with mother, is diagnosed. With slashers of the 1970s and 80s, Laurie Strode has displaced Norman Bates and inverted the gendered figure with whom the audience eventually and ultimately identifies. Even as Clover marks the shift from Psycho, Men, Women, and Chainsaws says Lila Crane is a bit like a proto-Final Girl. It's Lila, after all, who has the fortitude to enter the Bates home, particularly the basement, which is a slasher space Clover labels the terrible tunnel. And it's Lila who faces down Norman/mother, though, like Laurie Strode, she's aided at the last minute by a man. That's true. And there is a man who's killed right before that, remember, on the steps, where the film switches to a God's eye view and we see from above the slashing that occurs. Because that's the first time that we see mother really in action walking out of the bedroom. And then the man falls right down the stairs. So the terrible tunnel is also a good label for this, because remember, this is one of the things that that really bothered me about what's the one with the found footage, you guys, the Blair Witch Project, when they walk through the terrible tunnel into the basement and the guy's facing the wall. That image right there, that really did get to me. I thought that was a clever image. While Psycho exemplified a horror plot driven by detection and a stunning revelation, Halloween and other Final Girl slashers turn towards horror plotting of women heroes fighting evil. Boys also die in slashers. The pattern Clover notes is that these men often die by surprise, quickly, and at times entirely off screen. Unlike the women, each Final Girl and the women who preceded her in the story, the men are not subject to terror-inducing pursuits and prolonged, often torturous murders. Well, that would be natural, of course. But also, that makes a good point because they are often played as aloof in the films, right? What? You need to calm down. What? Don't worry. Oh, I'm sure it's nothing. We can explain this away, which is totally ridiculous. But maybe that's accurate in terms of some people, but I feel like if we have to stick to the paradigm. So if you're going to write a thesis, like if you're going to write an essay like this, right, where you're trying to not paint broad strokes, you can't do it the other way either. This pattern adds a vital piece to the puzzle of women protagonists for male audiences because it suggests that most male characters in slashers, with the exceptions of feminine male killers, which would be Skittles killers, right, or Baphomet's type killers, like in Psycho, are excluded as figures for spectator identification. Significantly, Clover also excludes the slasher himself from being a figure of identification beyond the first part of these films. That's interesting. Film scholar Carter Soules has raised significant questions, though, around the fandoms that have arisen around Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger, for instance. What are the questions? That people find it entertaining, and it's kind of like, you know, the Donnie Darko character, right? There's not a fandom, but in terms of identification and there are parts of it that are cool. Or Pat Bateman, right, with Sigma. The Final Girl is the hero of the film, so she and not Michael Myers and the others of his ilk who the cinemagoers cheer for and connect with. This puts a challenge to the idea that slashers play strictly or predominantly to male sadism. The answer to Clover's key question isn't that simple. Well, yeah, because it's not specifically male sadism. It's a kind of an occult beyond male sadism, right? It's a demonic sadism. And Friday the 13th is no exception, right? Because we do have this ghostly figure of Jason who looks like Grendel. I mean, he's really a Grendel character in this, right? With Grendel's mother being Mrs. Voorhees, right? Remember the image from the front of Jason Goes to Hell is the hockey mask with the serpentine dragon's tail, right? A kind of biblical dragon's tail, serpent tail going through the mask of the through the eye of the hockey mask. So in other words, we have to have a kind of a Beowulf figure in this, but of course it's turned into the final girl for a modernist audience. As a note on effect, the original studio maps audience reactions to slasher sequences by noting how people are silent when watching the stalking sequences, scream with fright during the actual slashings, and groan with revulsion when the ensuing mutilations are shown on screen. Mapping the order of emotional reactions to the sequences that recur brings into view how, why, and what these films convey to their audiences. That's interesting. I think that's an interesting thing to bring up. Okay, next is updating the final girl theory. So, let's see. This is, what's this from? This is from medium.com. So, I'm just going to take you through this and then go into the other two films. Okay? The final girl theory is a common trope in horror and slasher films. This is a quote from this magazine article if you're just listening. Made famous and fleshed out in detail by Carol J. Clover, author of Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Gender in the Modern Horror Film, 1992. Her definition of the final girl can be summarized from her writing in her essay, Her Body, Himself, Gender in the Slasher Film, 1987. Quote, she is abject terror personified. She alone looks death in the face, but she alone also finds the strength either to stay the killer long enough to be rescued or to kill him herself. She is inevitably female. Her scene occupies the last 10 to 20 minutes. Well, I think that's accurate in terms of the final girl trope. Right. Clover elaborates on the qualities of the final girl throughout the essay. We will return to more specifics on the final girl later on. Also, they haven't brought up how occasionally there is a male who sacrifices himself for the female character in terms of situationally or purposefully, but that's rare in these films. Clover defines the specifics of the slasher film. The qualities that locate the slasher film outside the usual aesthetic system, this is interesting, are the very qualities that make it such a transparent source for subcultural attitudes towards sex and gender in particular. She goes on to say that slasher films present us in startlingly direct terms with a world in which male and female are at desperate odds, but in which at the same time masculinity and femininity are more states of mind than body. That's okay. She argues that the genre, because of everything that is, provides a very clear picture of current sexual attitudes to the viewing public. The basis of Clover's theory lies in the reversal of the male-centered identification process of sadistic voyeur to a masochistic voyeur by having the identification shift to the final girl by the end of the film. The final girl's defeat of the inevitably male killer is the process of emasculation that allows the transfer from sadistic to masochistic. Well, that's an interesting take. It's surely an interesting take. I think that one way this was criticized was fast forward about 8 years. And we have the same exact criticism of American Psycho, the film, right? The Bret Easton Ellis film with Pat Bateman, and of course, Mary Herron was the director, so it fell apart. That was the criticism. That was the criticism of Bret Easton Ellis at the time, right? This is a sadistic film, where the slasher is a phallic symbol, echoing his sadism throughout, and the answer to that was, well, Mary Herron said, well, I'm the director and I'm a lady. But there are points to that are important because we're talking about serial killers, so it's not in the normal paradigm. So we can look at it through that view, right? Because this is an inverted paradigm in the first place. I'm very interested in seeing where this theory stands now within the world of modern slasher films, this writer says. There's fewer series like Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street, and more recently, some of the best horror can only be found on the indie circuit. Well, that's true, but this started as indie films. Clover covers Halloween, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Psycho, and Nightmare on Elm Street, and Hell Night in great detail. I think Hell Night is the one with what's her name from Romeo and Juliet? Leonard Whiting, and is it Olivia Hussey? Olivia Hussey, is she in Hell Night? Let's check real quick. Nope, Hell Night is Linda Blair. Which one is it that Olivia Hussey is in? Somebody in the chat, tell me what was Olivia Hussey in what horror movie? She was the girl in Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet. I know she's included in the book. So what's interesting here is that we're not given another character to identify with. We only have Maddie. This changes the dynamics of Clover's theory of audience identification. The reverse question, whether men might not also on occasion elect to betray their sex and identity with screen females, has scarcely been asked. Hush only gives the male audience the female victim to identify with. So this film is asking the question, what happens when there's no reversal of identification? What does it mean for the male audience if your choice of identification is only female? Maddie is the epitome of a modern final girl. She is completely on her own. She utilizes what she has around her with great tact, and in the end defeats the killer. No one saves her. She saves herself. The fact that she is deaf becomes a more peripheral fact by the middle of the film, and we're given instances where she almost uses it to her advantage, like when she uses the painfully loud smoke alarm to stun the killer, which is interesting. And this is talking about the movie Hush. And then, of course, we get House at the End of the Street that has J-Law and Elizabeth Shue in it. And then it goes on to talk about The Witch. So let's look at The Witch, because I really like this film. So The Witch is more of a horror film than a slasher film, but we still have a final girl in Thomasin. We just talked about this. Remember, we just talked about this? I talked about it in the Pan Part 2 analysis with Jamie. Of course, it's Thomasin, but also Thomasin gives her a kind of a proto-Baphomet character name, because just like Black Phillip becomes the combination of, he goes from a sort of a Pan figure into Lucifer, and then he's a Baphomet. But Thomasin is we get a male Thomas, right? Or a doubting Thomas combined with the word sin, literally, because the film is about their sense of it and how hardcore they are in the Puritan community. It's set in 17th century New England. The film revolves around a Puritan family. This is already a very male-centered environment. Her name is, here we go. Her name is also masculine. As Clover points out, this too is a common occurrence in the genre, the final girl, not with Alice. Her family is slowly picked off and killed by the witch. In the end, she succumbs to the witch, but she does survive. Well, because she chooses to. Throughout the film, her family are actually the ones who are the biggest threats to Thomasin. They blame her for the sudden disappearance of the family's youngest child, her brother Caleb's possession. They talk about sending her away to another family, and her father even locks her away in the goat stable. Her family believes she is a witch. Thomasin kills her mother in a fit of rage after her mother blames her for everything wrong that's happened to the family. Her mother becomes, remember, her mother, even though there's a vision of her mother being a witch. Wouldst thou like to live fergaliciously? Remember? Remove thy shift. Wouldst thou like the taste of butter? A pretty dress. Her family believes she's a witch. Thomasin kills her mother in a fit of rage after her mother blames her. Her mother is giving suck to the raven in that one scene. And her mother seems to be already a kind of witch. I mean, she's got the two twin siblings that are chanting for the witch. And all of their behavior brings on the witch in the devil wilderness, right? They're, instead of being in the wilderness and saying get thee behind me, Satan, they eventually sort of give in one thing after another. Her dad wrestles with Black Phillip, but then gets gored by the goat. And then in the end, what we have is not what this writer just said. We actually have she makes a conscientious decision, right? In the end, she writes her name in his book, in the Black Book of Death. She witnesses the death. She kills her own mother. She witnesses all of her family dying. She witnesses she hears the witch traumatizing her, landing on the rooftop. There's the bloody egg, right? There's the blood in the milk. And it's this continuous sort of I guess now they would say gaslighting and gang stalking towards, by this witch. We also have her brother's, her brother is creeping, by the way, towards her. You remember that one shot of him looking at her, and then swallowing the poison apple from the Scarlet Woman in the wilderness, right? He's possessed, and then he dies, and then eventually Thomasin gives herself over to the witch, who has kidnapped her infant sibling, right? And then there's that awful scene in the moon. The witch is floating in the moonlight. And then the end of the movie, of course, is straight out of Goya's paintings, where she is at the witch's Sabbath and floating. She is flying. She's now flying because she's a witch of the air. She's a spirit of the air. And she's written her name in the Black Book of Death. She will have no more age. She'll be a living dead. Right, before she's damned eternally, but she has the temporal things that she wanted. It's a very clever movie, right? Wouldst thou like to live fergaliciously? When we see the transformation from Black Phillip to Lucifer, of course, in that scene, we see the hoofs, and one hoof stands up, and then we see a foot as the next step, which is accompanied by the sound of bells. right? Demonic, the Luciferian bells, just like we hear the sound of bells in Hereditary, right? At the end with Paimon, and then he stands behind her and I will guide thy hand. He says, the father is faced with bad crops. All these may seem very worldwide in nature are emasculating the father. But eventually she ends up a kind of final girl, but it's almost an inversion of an inversion. So then there's much more here about Clover, Carol J. Clover. So perhaps I need to get that before we do our second installment. Okay, now let's go back to, where am I? There we are. Let's go back to American Horror Story 84. Please like and share, you guys. If you want to support me, you can support me via PayPal, Cash App, Venmo, with the links provided. Jason has provided those. Hey, yo, shouts out again. G Money, right? G Money, $10. Thank you so much. That was on PayPal. And I will look at the donor chat and the rest of them at the end. Thank you for dropping those links, Jason. Really appreciate you. All right, so before I scare you off with talking about American Horror Story, which I don't care honestly about this at all. I'm looking at this in objective. I don't care about the other seasons, but the one season that I have seen, because I watched 5 minutes of the first season, and if you like it, if you like watching these, you think they're entertaining, or even if they're entertaining trash or whatever. I know there's the one season where they're in the California Haunted Hotel. There's the one where there's the Coven. There's one in the Insane Asylum, all that stuff. But the one that I actually watched was 84, Camp Redwood, because the reason I was drawn into it was because I liked the opening sequence. I liked the title credits. It's so well done. It's like it's a total vaporwave, opening sequence. Synthwave going hard. It's got cassette tapes and neon, and actually I read that the title sequence that the director liked, the title sequence, somebody had done a fan cut. So the fan cut was done by it's got Corey Vega. Corey Vega made an unofficial opening credit scene for. You put it on YouTube. So, hey, man, shouts out to Mikhail, right? Mixkey at Technor Graphics, because this is what could happen with him. Technor Graphics, follow him on Instagram. Our friend does sweet graphics on Instagram. And this is I talked about this before in terms of music with Tyler, the Creator, hearing somebody put some beats up on online, and it was like 4 viewers, and he liked the beat, so he got the guy for his album. And the same thing happened with this guy, Corey Vega. The director saw the fan cut and hired him to do the opening sequence. So that's pretty cool. So anyway, basically what the show is about is we get camp counselors, and it's Friday the 13th again. They're camp counselors, and we see that in 19... Is it 19... It's not 1984 because it takes place in 84, but a few years before that, we see that camp opened, Camp Redwood, and we see that there are 3 camp counselors, and they're like inside of a bunk, and they're about to get freaky. They're about to get freaky with you. Oh, knocking the boots, right? They're about to knock the boots. They put a drape over their bed. One of the girls is hesitant. Is she going to be the final girl? Well, actually, she's going to end up being the bad girl. She's going to be the true villain of this thing. Spoilers, she's going to be the villain. And we hear jingle, jangle, jingle, jangle. And our favorite actor, John Carroll Lynch, shows up. He is great in this. This guy plays the Zodiac. This guy plays the bad guy in all these films. He's this gigantic dude who's got that donut haircut, and he plays a good bad guy. So he is Mr. Jingles. So Mr. Jingles is the bad guy. Mr. Jingles shows up. He's this creepy, gigantic beast man who wears a leather apron, and he's jangling his keys, and he's got leather gloves, and he slashes the 2 of the people who are making out, and he slashes through the back of the guy's head and right into the girl's eyeball, right? Yo, whoa, look at that. That's our friend Hesher right there. Shouts out to our friend Hesher. our friend Hesher drops 50 bones. He says, thanks for all you do. You're a legend. Hey, Hesher, you are the legend, my friend. And by the way, one more time so that everybody can know it, please, big night tomorrow night. Be here tomorrow night because we've got a big time analysis with our friend Hesher from Alternate Current Radio, Boiler Room, TNT. And we're going to be doing an analysis of Wes Anderson's film Asteroid City, which is a Barbie Oppenheimer nexus. Remember, this has been a long time coming because we talked about this in the summertime. I did the Barbie analysis. We talked about Oppenheimer. And we talked about how, I talked at the time about how Asteroid City, I hadn't seen it yet. And actually, it hadn't even come out yet. It seemed to be a nexus point between those two. And we got some big things with that film. It's going to be a fun analysis. So come here tomorrow night and see that. And thank you to Hesher for dropping that 50 bones super chat. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you, brother. Love you. So this one's well done because if you haven't seen Friday the 13th Part 1 and you've only seen it or remember it in your mind from when, let's say you were young when you saw it. I remember seeing this when I was very young and it really scared me. But when I went back and rewatched it, and it's not at all, looking back now because of the barrage of just absolute, gore and grottiness that we see in real life. So we've been desensitized to the point where the film isn't that bad, right? And in fact, Friday the 13th Part 2, the censors, they dialed back the gore. There was far less bloodshed because they didn't know there was going to be that much in Part 1. And remember that they were new to showing blood in the first place in films. I mean, Bonnie and Clyde was like the first film where they showed blood. And that was like 1967 or something. So when we get to American Horror Story, of course, which is season 9, 2019, it's full on, but it's done in a campy way. The whole thing is campy, and it's not scary. It's for adults, but it's not scary, and it's a parody. It's not a satire, but it's a parody of horror flicks and especially Friday the 13th. So the other girl gets slashed through the eyeball, and then we see as Mr. Jingle Jangles is walking out of the thing, out of the cabin. We see a scene like we hear about the Ted Bundy scene, right, with the sorority house in Florida, or like we heard recently. Remember the one in Idaho with the was that in Idaho? With the guy that's slashed up or whatever. I haven't heard the resolution to that, what they've done with that guy. But that's what it's supposed to be, right? And instead of a sorority, we get a camp, and everyone's dead. Okay. But as he's walking out, he takes a trophy, and his trophy is very Phoenix program. He cuts the ear off of one of the girls. She's got a daisy earring, so he cuts this flower off. And that is, of course, he's plucking it's like he's supposed to be Frankenstein, not Frankenstein's monster. We've done our Frankenstein analysis. Frankenstein's monster is Frankenstein. Frankenstein plucks the flower, and the flower is the ear with the daisy on it here. And also, this is like, this is Ears for Beers. This is the Phoenix program, Ears for Beers, right? Come back, remember they do that in the movie Universal Soldier, the necklace full of ears. It's also, I think, in Dead Presidents. Maybe it's in Dead Presidents they do that. So anyway, then we fast forward to 1984, we see these camp counselors, and they are just coming out of an aerobic session. Have you ever seen the music video Call on Me by Eric Prydz? Eric Prydz, not Eric Prince. Betsy DeVos's brother. Eric Prydz, Pryds, Call on Me, right? Steve Winwood sampled, actually, and Thomas Bangalter and DJ Falcon did a cut of that before that. They made that into one of their live sets. Thomas Bangalter from Daft Punk. But anyway, Eric Prydz did it, and it's a great music video. I can't believe it's been like 22 years since that came out. I remember when it came out, I was living in England. England or Northern Ireland. I think it came out when I was in England, in Bristol. Anyway, so they're doing aerobics, and it's very 80s, and we get Billy Lord. Billy Lord is the daughter of Carrie Fisher. I've got Carrie Fisher's autobiographical book up there somewhere, Postcards from the Edge. They made that into a film. It's an entertaining book. It's about her time in rehab in the 80s, post Return of the Jedi. I remember she said that she didn't even remember doing parts of Return of the Jedi because she was so whacked out on Percodan. And anyway, she goes to rehab for opiate and alcohol addiction and cocaine addiction. Anyway, the book is about that. Billie Lourd is her daughter. She's in all of these. She's a character player in all of these, in the sequence of all these movies. So Billie Lourd is there, and she is talking to Brooke. Brooke is Emma Roberts. Emma Roberts is the niece of Julia Roberts, way hotter too. And they're at this aerobics thing, and then of course we know that Emma Roberts is going to be the final girl, not only because she's the star of the whole series, right? Even though they have Lady Gaga and Cara Delevingne and all these witchy characters in there now, and Kim K. But Emma Roberts is the innocent character, in her late 20s, mid to late 20s. She's the innocent character, and there's a scene where after the aerobic session, they go into the showers, and Billie Lourd says, "You got a rockin' bod," and Emma Roberts kind of says, "Okay, thank you," and shies away because she is wholesome, right? And she doesn't like the blatant exhibitionism of these other highly sexualized LA 80s characters in the aerobic studio. She went there, she says she went there just for aerobics. So we know she's going to be the final girl because that's one of the qualities that the final girl has to have, right? And anyway, so moving on here, the show is, what happens is they become camp counselors, and the older lady who's running the camp says that she was the girl that had her ear cut off, and that she looked up, and by the grace of God, he gave her strength and allowed her not to move when they cut her ear off. But we know she's an unreliable narrator. You can see it in her eyes that she's lying about this. She's subverting everybody for the long game, and she ends up being one of the villains. And it's full of sort of campy twists because Mr. Jingles, we start to feel sympathy for Mr. Jingles because, I don't know, but something about his son. And then later on in the series, I'm fast forwarding here, I think episode 6, we really see one of the characters open up, and that's going to be, hey, shouts out to Real John Connor, who drops $15 on Cash App. Hey, thank you out there, sir. Really appreciate you. This Mr. Jingles was a real jerk, right? But we see another real jerk, and that is going to be the night stalker, Richard Ramirez, and he shows up in the sequence of this, and the guy who plays him does it very, very well. It's very campy, and of course, there's that scene that I told you about where he likes Billy Idol. He makes his way into L.A. He's sort of trained into being a serial killer by, I forget what the actor's name is. Don Swayze is also in this, right? We just talked about Patrick Swayze in Donnie Darko, and Don Swayze plays, I think, like a mechanic. But of course, Richard Ramirez was trained into his real life thing from his cousin who had just returned from Vietnam. I think he was Phoenix Program, and he showed him pictures of things that he'd done, talked about the awful things that he'd done involving R terms and Merc terms. Right. Trick or treat. What Doug Valentine says at the opening of the Phoenix Program book, bust in the door, trick or treat. And then he eventually got him involved in this, and then he made his prey on all these people. But Richard Ramirez plays a kind of type of Richard Ramirez in this. Yo, shouts out to Jerry right there. And what was Queensryche's song? Silent Lucidity? Silent Lucidity. That's a good song. I saw Billy Idol in concert for my birthday in 2003 in Norfolk. It was one of the best concerts I've ever seen. It was so good. And Idol only plays one way, full throttle. Of course, Billy Idol's best thing he ever did was playing Dog in the Doors movie. Remember that? Yeah, fuck you, Ray. Yeah, fuck off, Ray. Remember that? He's in Jim Morrison's retinue. He did that because he covered L.A. Woman. I think that was on Charmed Life. The album Charmed Life. I got the tape Charmed Life for my 10th birthday. I remember getting that because my aunt came in and gave me the tape. And I remember looking at, I've always liked the term charmed life. And then, of course, it's my favorite expression from Macbeth. I bear a charmed life, which must not yield to one of woman born, right? And I remember getting that because she said, you're double digits now. And I remember going, what is double digits? I was 10. So I got charmed life, and I got a semi-auto rubber bullet Tech 9 with a clip. Isn't that cool? Man, the 90s was awesome, yo. So anyway, sorry for the tangents there, folks, but that's what we do here. So anyway, Night Stalker plays into this. He goes to the camp, and then he gets caught. He ends up being in a prison cell alone and carving the pentagram into the palm of his hand and selling his soul to Satan, which they then dramatize in the show because they have this black vapor, right? Like the black goo and the black vapor, the black Stygian hell flames rise around him, and now he is what they go into the explicitly into the occult in the show because the camp will then function as an outer world, right? It functions as another world. We had the Crystal Lake in Friday the 13th Part 1, right? And we have the shattering of the glass. And here we have that where Camp Redwood functions as a kind of a time loop. So the camp counselors, they can be killed within the place, but they can live again. And their role, their quest is to keep watch over Ramirez because every time Ramirez wakes up, they have to kill him again so that he also will stay there and not go out into the outer world because he's a servant of Satan and he's going to be continuously like reincarnated in the outer world to keep stalking. And the main person that he wants to kill is Mr. Jingles. Mr. Jingles' son shows up. He's in 2019. He makes his way into the camp. He learns about this. They've been protecting him this whole time. Eventually, they kill Ramirez. Mr. Jingles kills Ramirez, and then we find out that the camp counselor that we were talking about with the daisy ear is the actual villain. They get rid of her, and then of course we have two final girls that live, and this is kind of it's a subversion of the trope, but still we know that Brooke, the one that we predicted, ends up being the final girl, and the last episode of that is called Final Girl. So I recommend that show in terms of, I don't recommend it or not, but it's not bad and it's fun and it's campy. It's supposed to be campy. Yeah, it's supposed to be. It is. I'm not saying it's not subversive, of course. I mean, and it deals with these themes, and that's just that season. I know the other seasons are much even weird. They're even freakier or whatever. But that of course is an extension or leading into a lot of the things that we see in normal life now. It's the subversion of normal life. But of course, campy parody is supposed to be something that we look at with a critical eye, right? We're supposed to see this with, not as a critique, that would be if it were a satire, but we can look at with a critique and with discernment and see that it's interesting and it's fun. The title credits alone are worth watching if you just watch the title credits. So the last film that we're going to do here, of course, is Barbarian. Like and share the stream, please, you guys. If you want to support me, you can do that. Barbarian. Now, this is a clever film. I did not expect this. And I don't know of the director. I don't know anything else that he's done. But the film has, what's her name? Georgina. She's English. She didn't go to drama school, I don't think. But she went to University College London. Georgina Campbell, and it's got Bill Skarsgård and Justin Long who shows up, and then of course Richard Brake. Richard Brake is an interesting character actor. He was, you can see Richard Brake. He's one of his best roles is Mandy. Fantastic film. Mandy is amazing, right? Cosmatos, visceral film, right? We all know Mandy here. Jerry says the director was from The Whitest Kids You Know. Thank you, Jerry. And Richard Brake plays a small role in this, but a pivotal role. And the movie came out in 2022. I was surprised by the movie. So yeah, and Justin Long it's interesting because he showed up now in a number of these films, and there are some political elements in this, right? There's the Timu movement that shows up as a critical element in this, and Justin Long has an interesting. There's an interesting twist that happens with his character. So the way the film begins, of course, the way that movies begin is always important, right? Remember, Usual Suspects began with the blurred lines. Donnie Darko began with the sound of thunder. Friday the 13th began with the sound of glass breaking, and we see the shattered glass and the logo pop out at us. And in this one, we see, or we hear the sound of hellish screaming, okay? And we see this character, Georgina Campbell, her character shows up. She drives up in a Jeep, and she's in a dark neighborhood. There's not much light around, and she's at an Airbnb. She gets out of her car. She walks up, and it's raining. She walks up to this, single-story house. We figure that she's in Detroit, and she is in Detroit. And I say you figure she's in Detroit because of the emptiness of the urbanscape, right? Remember we did Only Lovers Left Alive, and that was our vampire film from about a year ago for spooky season. And we saw a lot of that. In fact, that what they do in that film is sort of alluded to in this film. But she shows up. She can't remember the number to the lock, right? Ends up being 8331, right? She punches it in. There's no key, right? And then we see a light come on, and then the door opens, and it's Bill Skarsgård from It, right? Who's also in a number of these. The Skarsgård characters are in a number of these films, right? Now, I know that's meta extension of this, but it obviously plays a role in the casting. Of course, he was It. We saw Alexander Skarsgård in Infinity Pool that we covered, right? And then we see Stellan Skarsgård, their dad, in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, playing the creeper elite character in that. But he shows up, he's inside the house, and it turns out that he has rented the house on, some other website, right? And she's rented that. She's gotten the house on Airbnb, and we know that. Well, she's the girl that shows up, so we know she's going to be the final girl. We don't know if she'll live at the beginning of this, but we figure that she has the whereabouts because she shows up solo, but she does this thing where she looks around her first. She walks up to the house, and she has little subtle character clues that we know that she knows to take care of herself. She doesn't walk straight into the house. She's assertive enough to say, well, I rented the house. What are you doing here? And then it's a strange guy at the door. He has the wherewithal to not, he's not like, come on in, because we don't know whether to trust him or not. We don't know what's going to happen in the film or not, right? But eventually we learn that she proves who she is, he proves who he is, and she goes into the house. When she goes into the house, there are a lot of different things that she does which subvert the normal dumb character walking into danger, right? For instance, she finally says that she needs to go to the bathroom. She goes in there, she locks the door. When she comes out, he says he's making tea. She won't drink the tea because she didn't witness him making the tea. Later on, he has wine. He's sitting there, and he says, I didn't open it because it's a bottle of wine that was here, but I didn't want to open it and not in front of you because I knew you wouldn't drink it. She still doesn't drink the wine. She doesn't want to compromise herself in front of him. Because even we know from slasher films and from real life that even with the wine bottle corked, something can still be syringed into it, I suppose. So she knows not to trust him, but eventually they gain enough trust with each other that she stays. She doesn't want to go look for a hotel she tries, but there's no other hotels. She's in a bad neighborhood because at one point when she got to the door of the house, she looked out and she noticed that this was the only house that had a light on. Everything else in the neighborhood was dark. So sketchy, right? But she gains trust with him because she's there to make a documentary film. So we have sort of an aspect of film within a film. And that is what gives us that allows us to justify the fact that we're looking at the characters and the actors who play them outside of the film. I think that justifies that. But he says, one person you should interview, me. And it turns out that he's part of something like the Lion Tamers or something, which is like a jazz collective, which is living in sort of, old squatted houses in Detroit. And then eventually she goes to bed and she locks her door. Well, her door opens in the middle of the night. and she goes out to check on it, but in a cautious way, and she hears something. She sees that he's sleeping on the sofa, but he's having a nightmare, and it's very strange because it's have you ever heard that before? I mean, I'm sure everybody here has woken up outside of a nightmare, or you've been around your family when somebody was having a nightmare, and it is pretty scary, especially when she's a woman, a stranger in this house. But that allows us to trust that he's not the one that opened the door, because he seems to be authentically shaken when she wakes him up, and he says, "What the fuck?" And then we see a door creak behind them down the hall. Okay, so fast forward to they're in the house, and it's the next day. Sorry, I'm taking big gulps of my Aloha energy drink here. She wakes up. It's the next day, and then eventually, there's a laundry room. She's doing the laundry, and then there's another room, and she goes down the steps, and she goes down into the basement, and she finds basically John Wayne Gacy's basement. Okay, now look, I've never stayed in Airbnb. Okay, I've never spent the night in one. I don't really plan to ever. Not that it can't, something bad can't happen anywhere in a hotel. But when you go down into the basement of your Airbnb or even in your own house and you see that there's a secret door in the wall with a rope coming out of it, and you pull it open and there's a corridor, there's the terror tunnel, don't go in there, right? Get out. So she, of course, goes in. When she goes in, she sees that there is a camcorder room that looks all gnarly and grody. And there's a bed with a camcorder set up, and there's a handprint on the wall. Don't go in there, right? Fuck that. Don't go in. And if you go in, make sure you have your PBR Street Gang Almighty B Master with a scope, right? Or that you are, Arnie Schwarzenegger Predator style strapped up, or you go in with your homeboys. Do not go in there by yourself, right? Unless you are aware and trained in the art of Monarch, like my book is going to be, right? Like my book talks about. That character would be fine going in there. He would be able to handle himself, but she can't. And she comes back up. She ends up telling Skarsgård about it. He goes down. Anyway, sequences happen, and then she hears muffled screaming down the corridor, right? Well, this is not good. Muffled screaming down the terror tunnel is never good, especially when you're in the basement of a Detroit house in the suburbs and it's all dark and the rest of the neighborhood's dark. And then at one point, remember, she walks outside and this hobo demon walks by and he says, "Hey, you young lady," right? "Yo, young lady, yo, don't go in there. Don't go, hey, you," right? And she's scared of the man, but it turns out that he's kind of just like the archetype messenger Tiresias, I guess he's kind of a Deus Ex Machina angel figure from beyond, because he's beyond in the neighborhood. He's homeless in the neighborhood, and he comes out of nowhere, just like the Farmer McDonald drunk character, schizo character in Friday the 13th Part 1, right? He says, he's trying to warn her, and she's scared of him because of his appearance. We learned that appearances are only skin deep, right? Which is what we're going to learn in this film. Oh, boy. And he's going to reappear. Thank goodness he's a Deus Ex Machina, right? Literally later on, jumping forward here, the spoilers because we're doing the analysis, but later on when she gets out of the tunnel and she runs into the basement, she can't get up she can't shoulder her way through the door. Why not? Dude, if there was ever time to use your superhuman adrenaline strength, shoulder your way through that damn basement closet door and get out. Well, she doesn't. She actually smashes the glass from the basement, right? She breaks the glass. She breaks on through to the other side, back into the overworld, out of the it's a literal underworld. And she gets pulled out by the hobo demon. He pulls her out. And he says, "I told you not to go in there. I told you." Right? And then we know she's definitely the final girl, because at that point she says, "There's a man in there. There's a man in there. We got to save him." And he's like, "That's your business, lady. That's your business." I'm not John Blaze like that, right? Well, anyway, going back, when she goes into the tunnel, we see Skarsgård, and he, of course, is like, he's still fussing at her, right? Calm down, calm down. Yes, shouts out to Glitchy Rhythm out there. It says $5. I like your analysis perspective on junk. Any chance of more horror for the upcoming season? Yes, we do have more horror for the upcoming season. We'll be doing Dark Fall, Spooky Season, Spooktober season episode 2 coming up shortly. That'll be either, I don't know, Friday or Sunday night or sometime in actual October. But we're going to be doing more with the final girl. And we've done review Possessor. I've done Possessor. Yeah, go back and look at the channel. I've done Possessor. And I don't know. We'll be doing other. I'm going to try to find horror flicks and Final Girl that haven't been done very often, I suppose. But also just as a side tangent here, on Thursday night you can catch me on our friend Maddie's channel, Digital Minefield, The Real Cooter Brown, and we will be reviewing Ryan Johnson's film Looper, which is a great film. And then also tomorrow night, Asteroid City here with Hesher, and then Saturday, Truman Show on Made by Jim Bob's channel. And then one more spooky season thing that I have coming up is an analysis of Creeper Kang's The Dark Half. So I'll be reading this tomorrow, and I could probably make that my way through that in one day, and then maybe doing it on Friday night as a stream. So, yes, making that threshold. So, thank you so much for that super chat. And so, anyway, she goes down and she sees Skarsgård, and then out of the darkness, right, de profundis, because they're in the underworld, comes what looks like an actual salivating skin demon, just like in what we talked about in Pan's Labyrinth on Jamie's channel, right? This salivating skin demon comes out of nowhere, grabs Skarsgård, and bashes his head into the wall. So we see his face collapsed, just like we saw in Drive, of course. Remember, Ryan Gosling does that to the character in the elevator in Drive, smashing the persona. But also we saw this in Pan's Labyrinth. That also occurred in Pan's Labyrinth, right? So then we cut to a different sequence. Now we see... what's his face? The Hollywood actor who's playing a Hollywood actor. What's his name? Justin Long. Justin Long, who, by the way, who was he going out with? He was going out with the girl from Ted 2 when all that happened. Anyway, so he's driving along, no top. He's got his convertible. He's driving along, Malibu or whatever, and he's listening to some song. And he gets a call from, I guess, his agent and a bunch of people, and they say, hey, basically, long story short, a story is broken. They're doing an investigation of you. There have been allegations against you, and you've been accused of blatantly R word, right? Now, we don't know. Again, it's what this film is great at is manipulating our sympathies because and confusing us in terms of who we are supposed to ally ourselves with. We started off with the final girl, right? And we don't know whether to trust Skarsgård. We end up trusting him, and then he gets smirked out. So then we get this, out of nowhere, we get this second sequence. Now, the second sequence functions as something pretty clever here in the movie because, first of all, it's a completely different part of America. The rest of it takes place in Detroit, right? And now we're sort of transferred over to the West Coast, and we get this film version of things that are happening. We get an outer context, and that's to show us that the outer world is still going on while we're trapped in the inner world, and we don't know what's happened to Georgina. We don't know what's happened to her. Also, we're going to learn that the bad things are happening in the underworld while the outer things are going along, but the underworld is still functioning. So we have an outer world and an inner world, right? It's kind of not a macrocosm, microcosm. I suppose it would be like we just have two separate worlds, and we're going to learn sort of circles within circles. One functions as simulacra of the other one until they converge, right? And we learned that he has been doing things in the sort of underworld. He's been accused of underhanded activity. And the reason that this ties into Michigan is because he ends up having to go back to Michigan to try and sell his properties that he owns so that he can survive, because everybody dumps him because of the allegations. We don't know who to ally ourselves with. We just know that we don't know whether the things are true or not, right? Well, but we learned that it's sort of relevant in terms of the time, yes. And he goes back, and we learned that he owns the house in Michigan. He's owned it for a long time, and he's renting it out through a property manager. And then the property manager won't talk to him because they've heard the news, and because he's being a jerk to them when he talks to them on the phone. He spends the night. He is completely like unaware of anything happening in the house, just as he seems to be sort of aloof of his own activities. And we lose sympathy for him when he calls one of his homeboys up. He goes to a bar. We're like, okay, well, he's got friends. He goes and meets with his homeboy. Just the way that he's talking to his friend seems to be emblematic of the fact that he's a Hollywood guy, I guess. In here, he's an actor who's about to star in a major television series or something. And his friend, the way he and his friend are talking to each other is like not real. Like it's almost like they had a scripted way that friends talk to each other in a bar, and it's very weird. He's like, "Come on, man to man, just tell me what happened." And it's like, what? The way they're talking is very weird. And then Justin Long admits that what they're portraying in terms of the allegations may be true. We don't know the extent of it yet, but we know that it may be true because of how he reacts when he's with his friend. So then he goes back home, and then he finds the basement room, goes down into it, and runs back up, he grabs a knife, he grabs a flashlight, and he says, "Okay, I'm a man, I can take care of this." But he's wearing like a pink open shirt, and he just looks unprepared for what he's about to walk into, right? We can trust that this guy is not going to make it. But he goes down into the underworld, and he sees the scene with he sees the Trotcher room, right, with the camcorder and the bed. Any person seeing this would immediately freak out, but he doesn't, right? I forget why he gets a tape measure. He gets a tape measure, and then he walks into the creepiest room, second creepiest room. He walks into another creepy room, and it's a room that looks like a pink palace. It looks like the Pink Palace in True Detective season 3, right? The Pink Palace is a MK Ultra room, right? Monarch, MK Ultra, horrid Hell Vision room. And he walks in, and there's a tape playing of a woman breastfeeding a child. And the way that it's talking, he goes, "What the fuck?" And you're like, "What is this?" Right? And you hear this, wah, wah, right? And then the tape measure starts to be pulled, and you're like, "Oh, get the fuck out." And then he drops the knife, of course. So he's the feminine character in this at this point, right? Because he drops, in terms of the tropes of normal horror movies, he drops the knife. He can't control himself. He's too scared, right? And he runs, and then he finds himself in a hole. He's in a hole. So he's in the underworld, and then, of course, he turns on the flashlight, and there's Georgina. She's alive, and she says, "Shut up," right? You got to stop crying. Shut up. So she's taking control of the situation. They flipped, right? And then we see there's a grate on top, and then we see this beast character drop a hairy milk bottle down, and she says, "Drink it." And he's like, "No." And then she drinks it. Of course, don't drink it. But she drinks it. She says she's figured it out. She says the hell demon wants you to be her baby, right? Your human baby. So be the human baby and wah, wah from the milk bottle, from the hairy milk bottle. He says no. The beast demon opens the grate up, drags him out of there. He's dropped the knife and the flashlight, so Georgina gets it. She runs out. She escapes. Then she runs out the window, and she meets the hobo demon outside, breaking the window, breaking the psychic glass, and she's okay. But because she's the final girl and she's the hero, She has some grounding. She has some beliefs. She has some sense of saving other people. She says, I got to go back inside. Right. It's a Moloko, baby. It's a Moloko, baby, Velicet. Right. Drink the Moloko, baby, because that's what it is. You're right, Jason. And she goes back. First she calls the cops, and the cops show up, and this is another of the social things that occurs at the time, and this is probably absolutely true. The cops show up, and they go, and they see her, and they're like, she's like, help me. I've been kept inside for all this time. Right. And they're like, ma'am, get your crackhead fingers off of the car. Right. And she's like, I'm not a crackhead. I've been held hostage. They don't believe her at all because look at the neighborhood. They get a call for a 187 somewhere else. They got to go take care of it. And she's like, what? You're just going to leave me? They just leave her. So anyway, she goes back inside. She saves him. They get out of the house and they go off and they stay with the hobo demon in his urbanscape hideaway, okay? And he's telling them, she gets stabbed, by the way, on the way out. This is the movie Barbarian, 2022, Barbarian. So there's this great scene where they're sitting there talking by the fire, right? Again, it's summertime. There's the fire. And she says, the hobo demon says, look, she come out of there at night. She come out of there at night. She go hunting like a predator around here. You know, you gotta get out of here, right? So they go and they hang out in his place. They're cooking they're cooking beans, right? And then, and she says, aren't you afraid that he's going to come here and get you? And he goes, shit, I've been here 15 years. She ain't never come up into this motherfucker. And then, of course, bam, hobo demon breaks through the wall, right? And what did we already miss the scene where she drove up to the house? She got in the car. She has a snake in her car, by the way. Remember the snake in Friday the 13th? I know I'm kind of all over the place with this, but I'm trying to go through the sequence because there's a lot of the film. She has a snake hanging from her rearview mirror, which is like Order of the Silver Serpent, right? That we saw in Ninth Gate, that we talked about with Astra Argenta, Order of the Silver Star. And the Jamie stream, remember the OTO Nox ritual, NOX ritual. And she's got this serpent. And that's interesting because of the black snake that showed up at the beginning of Friday the 13th. But anyway, she sees the hobo demon burst out of the front door into the upper world from the underworld, and she drives the car right into the demon. Yes, smoked it, whatever it is, and it's like, and it smashes the windshield with its hands, and we see that this is some sort of barbarian otherworld demon creature, right? What is this thing? Right? She escapes. Then anyway, the demon creature comes and gets them. One thing that happens, by the way, in the meantime, is probably the most important scene, which is when she comes to rescue, what's his name? Zach Flanagan? I forget the name of the actor. We're going to call him Zach Flanagan. That's what he seems like to me. Justin Long. I call him Zach Flanagan. I don't know why. But she goes down and, yeah, it made that noise. And he's in the underworld and he finds a side room. Remember, he already found the Pink Palace room. Now he finds the worst room. Okay, he goes inside and there's another tape playing and there's VHS tapes all over the wall with names written on them, which is not good. One of them says like, Alice. Jemima. One of them says puker. Oh my gosh. And then we see Richard Brake in a bed. So Richard Brake, who we had seen in a flashback sequence, Richard Brake, there was a flashback to the 80s. We hear Reagan music. And this is we had the side flash. Now we had the flashback. And Richard Brake comes out of his Edward Scissorhands perfect Technicolor multicolored panoramic house when this was a great neighborhood in Detroit. He gets in his Caprice and he drives to the grocery store and he gets baby products, right? And so it's in the 80s. Then he gets in his car and he spots a woman. He then follows the woman to her house. From the trunk of his car, he's Ted Bundy style, puts on a different outfit, disguises himself as some sort of electrician, walks up to the house and he says, ma'am, we're just checking the neighborhood. Maybe I could check your house. Why would she let him in? Especially him, right? he goes into the house, he goes into the bathroom, runs the faucet, and then unlocks the window. And then he walks out and he says, "Good day, ma'am." So then then we get back to flash forward, and we know that this means that he is a Bundy character, and that he's going to go back and he's going to take this woman. And then now in the flash forward sequence where we get the current day, we see Richard Brake as an old man, 40 years onward, and he is inside. He's in this bed. And we see all these videotapes, and we know that that woman had to be one of the women. We still don't know how this all ties together yet. But then at one point he reaches in and even Zach Flanagan says to him, "What the fuck, man? You did this?" So we know that, like, at this point we're starting to think he's not a bad guy because he's repulsed by what he sees. It's just that there's relevance in his worldview, right? According to bad and worst. I mean, and so he sees the guy, and then he pulls out a revolver, and then he shoots himself in the head, and that brings the hobo demon. Anyway, moving forward here, I know I'm going really fast here, people, but I'm trying to fit in a kind of analytical terms as we go through this. So then, after hobo demon breaks through the walls of the ghoul breaks through the walls, right? And they run away. So Zach Flanagan and Georgina run away, and they find a water tower or something, and there's a spiral staircase. They take the stairway to heaven. They run up it. And when they get to the top, this calls into question who is the villain in this, right? And they're all bad except for the hobo demon that saved her and Georgina. She's the final girl, right? But when they get to the top of the water tower, he says there's nowhere left to go. He sees Barbarian running up the stairs, and he says, "Only one of us can make it. She has to go after, she's going to go after you or whatever." He grabs Georgina, and he throws her off the water tower. This is very clever. He throws her off. She's falling into the abyss. But Ghoul Barbarian runs and dives after her and saves her. So the Barbarian saves Georgina. Now, we learned from good hobo demon Deus Ex Machina that Richard Brake's character had kidnapped some woman and given birth to this baby, and then had a baby, and then had another one. The worst kind of creeper demonic activity you can imagine, until eventually he created a kind of a assessed clone, right? Which is this Barbarian. And the Barbarian is his, wife, daughter, like 33,000 degrees down the line, and has like the yellow eyes of living in the underworld and the sallow skin of the Pan's Labyrinth demon, and the voice of a hellish falcon, right? And she is looking for her baby. And so she thinks Georgina is her baby. So she saves her jumping off of this water tower, right? And then Zach Flanagan runs down and he says, "I'm sorry, you understand. I had to save myself," right? And Barbarian stands up and like crushes his head. Right, she already ripped the arm off of the Deus Ex Machina and beat him to death with it. She crushes his head, right, and then reaches down and says, "Mama, mama," and then Georgina blows her head off, and then that's the end of the movie. So final girl lives, and what's clever about the movie is that at that point, it's almost like they're trying to make you have sympathy for the Barbarian character, right? They also try to make you have sympathy for Zach Flanagan. But it doesn't work for anyone with discernment watching it. You're like, all these people, they gotta, just no. But is this also supposed to be, there's also supposed to be a greater sort of wider critique on society, because of course they're living in the outskirts, or what becomes the outskirts of Detroit, right? To say that these people are treated like humanoids and like they're not people, right? Even by the authority figures. Well, in actuality, there are people who are acting like not people. And there's an underworld. What we're seeing here is that there's an underworld just under the surface. There's this whole labyrinthine, and it's a labyrinth. So when she goes down into this tunnel underworld system, it also tunnels. You can't help but think of McMartin, because it's like the same things are happening in the McMartin world here in this underworld, and there's an underworld within the underworld. So there's circles of hell even in the living world. And so this Richard Brake character has created these demonic characters, and he is this kind of father of a lineage of an inverted world. And eventually, thankfully, the girl gets out of it. And so now we know that that's the end of Zach Flanagan's career and life, and also the end of this stalking of this neighborhood, right? So it's a clever film, right? Because the Barbarian is not just the Barbarian, but it's also Richard Brake, who's the uber Barbarian. And then there's the Barbarian of Justin Long Flanagan's character, who acts like a barbarian. And there's the Barbarian in terms of the way the cops treat Georgina. There's the way that they act, which is barbaric. And all of the people on the videotapes were barbarized, right? So, yes, she is a girl boss, right? Until she finds out what but she's, I admire the fact that she plays against type in terms of walking in and being able to take care of herself, right? She does notice her surroundings, and I think that's one of the clever things about the film. And a lot of times the final girl will do that, right? This is what Clover was saying about the final girl, is that, and this is not in a feminist way. I see this in a different paradigm. This is a human being. This is a woman who does not walk into a situation where she knows she's not paying attention to the alert signals. Oh, she doesn't just walk into the house. She doesn't just take a drink of the tea. She doesn't just drink the wine. She doesn't just, she tries to hold the door open when she goes back. She sets up a mechanism so that the door won't shut on her. She's sober-minded, and she's also wholesome, right? She doesn't sleep with the guy in the house. She's, and she's trying to do this career or whatever, but she ends up, the look of shock on her face when he throws her off of the tower into the abyss, right? Where the demon dives after her. So, it's an interesting film. It plays against type. Yes. So that is Barbarian. Right? Breaking that window. But my favorite sound out of all these movies, besides the Billy Idol song, "Flesh for Fantasy, we are all flesh for fantasy," is the sound effect used in Friday the 13th Part 1. I think that's really funny. Go back and watch that film and you'll see what I'm saying. Right, whenever Mrs. Voorhees shows up. So that is Final Girl, Dark Fall, Spooktober, Spooky Season, Part 1. I hope you liked those films. And again, and Real John Connerson said that $15 and said, oh, "What if it were you hanging up on that wall?" I don't know. That Mrs. Voorhees was a real jerk. Let's look and see if we got any other super chats here, because we had some nice support this time, and I hope you guys appreciated this as a kind of, again, a prerequisite, a precursor, leading us into Spooktober, spooky season. And I don't know if you like all of the content that I've been throwing your way. Of course, please go back and check out my Icelandic saga analysis last night. I thought that was go back and watch it on EGIL'S SAGA and the Viking literature. Also, I did Nightcrawler. I did Nightcrawler and The Usual Suspects and Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of the Amontillado before that. And I will talk again one more time about what we have coming up, you people, human citizens. So let's see. Let's look at dono chat here. Let's see. We had I think Moldy Apple. Let's see. Moldy Apple dropped $11. That might have been in the last stream. Shouts out to Moldy Apple though, supporting the stream, supporting me. Really appreciate you. Yes, that was last stream. Shouts out to Moldy Apple. Let me refresh this. Yo, shouts out to Bazed Literary Enjoyer, who drops $5 on Dono Chat. Really appreciate that. Thank you, BLE. All you do is BLE. Thank you so much for that. Yo, listen, we got our memberships. Yes, thank you, Moldy. I appreciate you. Hey, you know what? I appreciate you. Anyway and all the time. Thank you for supporting me so much. And we've got our memberships coming up too. Don't forget. Oh, I can drop a heart on there. Sweet. Look at that. Yo, again, shouts out to Buster, Mr. and Mrs. Buster out there, who dropped $100 in the super chats. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Shouts out to Hesher McHeshington, who drops $50 again, who said, Bazed Lit, thanks for all you do. You're a legend. No, you, sir, are the legend. Shouts out to Glitchy Rhythm, who drops $5 and liked my analysis. Also, yeah, go back and watch my Possessor analysis. In fact, let me see if I can pull that up real quick for you guys. It's hard to do on here. See if I can pull this up. Come on. There we go. Yeah, I did Possessor and Infinity Pool. So let me share that with you guys. Uh-oh. I'm freezing because I'm looking at too much. I got too many open tabs. So let me share that with you guys right here. That's my Possessor and Infinity Pool analysis that we did a while back. Yo, shouts out to Melly for that $5 super chat right there. I really appreciate you. Sends Hobo Demon sends milk. Hobo Demon. Oh, nope. Go back. Nope. Go. Oh, shit. Oh, I did not mean to do that. Well, I just closed my chat. Oh, I did not mean to do that. I'm totally boomer teching in here, you guys. Oops. Did not mean to close that. Okay, well, there goes the chat. So, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Really appreciate that super chat there. Appreciate you. And I think that's about it, you guys. So, let's see. To play us out tonight. To play us out. What does that mean, to play us out? What does that mean? Go, to play us out. Here's Rooks G and a cut off his new album. Okay, so again, coming up again soon. Tomorrow night we will have Hesher on here, our friend Hesher from Boiler Room, and we will be doing Asteroid City, Wes Anderson's Asteroid City. Right? Please join us here tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, I think. Beast Coast time, something like that. I have it up already, so you can go to the stream there. Please like and share. Also, please join me at Maddie the Real Cooter Brown, because we will be doing an analysis of the movie Looper on Thursday night. Saturday, join us at Made by Jim Bob on YouTube and Rockfin, because we will be covering The Truman Show. I guess maybe Friday I will be doing Stephen King's The Dark Half, talking about DID, MPD, BPD, and the occult, and Creeper Kang. Not a Kang. And much, much more. If you want to see any literary analyses or even film analysis, then please drop them in the chat afterwards. You can always support me on the About page. Thank you to everybody who's been here in the chat. Thanks to everybody out there. Love y'all. Hope everybody goes strong. Let's go hard into spooky season here, into Spooktober, right? Watch those movies that we covered tonight. Please go back and watch my old streams. And that's about all I got, y'all. Thank you for being here, and I love y'all and appreciate you. Thank you for all the support. And let's keep on living. I will see you guys soon. Let's go. Let's go into Rook's G to play us out. Here we go. I'll write it, and we'll do it live. We do it live here. Take it away.
Styles, can I ask you something? Do you really like working on Kane stuff?
You really like busting people?
Yeah. I bust frauds, I bust phonies. I love it.
Have you ever busted anyone you know?
Yeah, I tried it. Doesn't make any difference. See, in my business, you soon find out that anybody's capable of anything. Think of it, they've done it.
Doesn't leave you much to believe in.
Yeah, but think of the upside. It doesn't leave you too much to be disappointed in either.
Got my chat back. There we go. Cheers, everybody. Love y'all. Peace.
Believe me, the sooner we're off the planet, the better.
Now you sound like Kane. You really like busting people?
I bust frauds, I bust phonies. I love it. In my business, you soon find out that everybody's capable of anything. You can think of it, they've done it.
Doesn't leave you much to believe in.
Yeah, but think of the upside. At least it doesn't leave you too much to be disappointed in either. Believe me, the sooner we're off the